The world buried her, but she was still alive.
Let me tell y'all something. In a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of Atlanta, a grown man named John Whitaker dropped to his knees like his whole soul had spilled out onto the cold morning grass. Now listen, this wasn't some ordinary man. And this wasn't some regular sad day. John was kneeling at his baby girl's grave, a daughter the whole world believed burned to death in a cabin fire 2 months ago. And baby, when I tell you this man cried, he cried the way a parent cries when the universe stops making sense. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Daddy's here, sweetheart. Daddy's right here." And that sound, Lord, it was the kind of hurt you feel in your bones. But here's the part that'll make your heart skip. Just a few steps away, hiding behind an old oak tree, his dead daughter was standing right there, alive, shaking, watching her daddy mourn her like she was gone forever, terrified he might look up, terrified he might call her name. And why? Because the same people who faked her death were the same people trying to kill her father next. And baby, they were closer to him than his Sunday socks. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does a 12-year-old girl end up watching her own father cry at a grave with her name on it? Who would be cold-blooded enough to fake a child's death and let a parent suffer like that? And more importantly, why? What could possibly be worth that level of cruelty? Hold those questions close, because the answers are going to cut deeper than you can imagine. See, John Whitaker wasn't just any father. This man had built an empire from the ground up. We're talking about a construction company that transformed Atlanta's skyline, real estate investments across 3 states, and a bank account that had more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. But here's what made John different from other wealthy men. He never forgot where he came from. He gave to his community, helped families buy their first homes, and treated every person with dignity, whether they were a CEO or a janitor. And his daughter, that little girl was his entire world. After her mother passed away from cancer when she was just 6 years old, John promised he'd be both parents to her. He kept that promise for 6 years, until he met someone who seemed like an answer to his prayers. Her name was Denise Crawford. Beautiful, charming, with a smile that could light up any room she walked into. She volunteered at the church, organized charity events, and when she met John at a fundraiser, she seemed genuinely interested in him as a person, not just his money. They dated for a year before John proposed, and during that time, Denise treated his daughter like she was her own. She braided her hair, helped with homework, took her shopping for school clothes. John thought he'd finally found the partner he'd been praying for, someone to help him raise his little girl, someone to grow old with. Lord, if he only knew. Then there was Marcus Whitaker, John's younger brother. 2 years apart, but they'd always been close. When their father died, John stepped up and made sure Marcus finished college. When Marcus struggled to find his footing in life, John brought him into the business, made him a partner, gave him a salary that most folks only dream about. Marcus was always there with advice, always ready to handle things when John needed to step away. The kind of brother you'd trust with your life. The kind of brother you'd never suspect could smile in your face while plotting your death. But here's where the story gets darker than a moonless night. 2 months before that cemetery scene, John's daughter went to spend a weekend at Denise's cabin. It was a place Denise owned before the marriage, tucked away in the woods about 2 hours outside Atlanta. She'd told John it would be good for them to have some stepmother and daughter bonding time. John thought it was sweet. He kissed his baby girl goodbye on a Friday morning, told her he loved her, and watched her drive away with Denise, waving from the back seat. He had no idea that would be the last time he'd see her smile for 2 whole months. That Sunday night, John's phone rang at 11:47. He remembers the exact time because that's the moment his world shattered. It was the fire department. There'd been a massive fire at the cabin. The structure was completely destroyed. They'd found remains, small remains, and personal items belonging to a child. John's knees gave out right there in his living room. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The police said Denise had driven back to Atlanta Saturday morning for a business meeting, planning to return that evening, but the fire started around 3 in the afternoon. Fast, aggressive. By the time neighbors saw the smoke and called it in, it was too late. Denise was devastated, or at least that's what everyone saw. She blamed herself, cried until her eyes were swollen shut, barely ate for weeks. Marcus was right there too, holding his brother up when John couldn't stand on his own, handling business meetings John couldn't face, making funeral arrangements John couldn't bear to think about. The whole community mourned. The church held a memorial service that over 500 people attended. John stood at that podium and could barely get through 3 sentences before breaking down. And through it all, Denise and Marcus were right there, the picture of family support in the face of tragedy. But here's what nobody knew. Here's what makes this story so twisted it'll make your stomach turn. That fire, it was set intentionally. The remains they found, they weren't John's daughter. And that little girl, she was alive, locked in a basement 70 miles away, terrified, confused, and wondering why the stepmother she trusted had betrayed her. For 2 months, she lived in that darkness, not knowing if she'd ever see her father again, not understanding why this was happening, hearing footsteps above her head, and praying they wouldn't come down those stairs. So, what would make 2 people, a wife and a brother, commit such an evil act? What secret was worth kidnapping a child and destroying a man's will to live? And how did that little girl end up at that cemetery on that specific morning, watching her father break down at a grave that should have been empty? Keep watching, because when the truth comes out, you're going to wish it was just a nightmare. But baby, this was real, and it happened to a family that never saw it coming. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to when John Whitaker was just a dreamer with calloused hands and a heart full of hope. This man grew up in a small neighborhood on the west side of Detroit, where opportunities were scarce and dreams died young. His father worked at the auto plant until his body gave out when John was just 14. His mother cleaned houses and took in laundry just to keep food on the table. But she taught John something that money couldn't buy. She taught him integrity. She'd tell him every single night, "Baby, you build your life brick by brick, and you make sure every brick is laid with honesty." John took those words and built an empire on them. By the time he was 23, John had saved enough to start a small construction crew. 3 men, 1 beat-up truck, and more determination than sense. He took jobs other contractors wouldn't touch. The difficult ones, the ones that required working in the Georgia heat until your hands bled. But John showed up every single day, delivered quality work on time, and treated every client like family. Word spread. Within 5 years, Whitaker Construction was the name on half the commercial buildings going up in Atlanta. Within 10 years, John had diversified into real estate development, property management, and commercial investments. The boy from Detroit, who used to wear second-hand shoes, was now sitting on a fortune worth over $40 million. But here's what made John different from most wealthy men. He never forgot the struggle. Every Christmas, his company sponsored 50 families, paying their rent for 3 months and making sure their children had gifts under the tree. He created a scholarship fund that sent 20 kids to college every year, kids who looked just like he did at their age, hungry for a chance. When the church needed a new roof, John wrote the check and never mentioned it to a soul. When Mrs. Patterson down the street got sick and couldn't afford her medications, John made sure her pharmacy bill was covered for life. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he remembered what it felt like to be helpless, to need help and not know where to turn. And then there was his daughter, Isabella. Oh, let me tell you about this child. Isabella came into the world on a rainy April morning, and from the moment John held her, he knew his purpose had changed forever. She had her mother's eyes, warm and deep brown, and a smile that could chase away any dark cloud. Her mother, Patricia, was John's college sweetheart, the woman who believed in him when he was still just a kid with big dreams. They built their life together, celebrated every milestone, and when Isabella was born, their happiness felt complete. But life has a way of reminding you that nothing is guaranteed. When Isabella was 6 years old, Patricia started feeling tired all the time. At first, they thought it was just stress, maybe anemia, but the tests came back with words that changed everything. Stage 4 breast cancer. It had already spread. The doctors gave her 6 months. She fought for 14. John watched the love of his life fade away, day by day, and there wasn't a single thing his money could do to stop it. The day Patricia passed, John held Isabella on his lap and made a promise. He told her, "Baby girl, Mama's watching over us now, and Daddy's going to be here for you every single day. I'm going to be your mama and your daddy, and I'm going to make sure you never feel alone." And he kept that promise. For 6 years, John raised Isabella on his own. He cut back on business trips, rearranged his schedule around school events, learned how to braid hair from YouTube videos at 2 in the morning. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every science fair. Isabella was shy, the kind of child who preferred books to crowds, who noticed things other people missed. She'd see when John was having a hard day and leave little notes on his pillow that said, "I love you, Daddy," with hearts drawn in crayon. She was observant in a way that children often are, picking up on emotions and tensions that adults thought they were hiding. But John worried. He worried that Isabella needed a mother figure, someone who could teach her things he didn't know how to teach. He worried that his daughter was growing up too fast, taking on the role of comforting him when it should have been the other way around. He prayed about it, asking God to send the right person into their lives if that was part of the plan. And then, at a charity fundraiser 3 years ago, he met Denise Crawford. Denise was everything that looked right on paper. She was 42, never married, worked as a regional manager for a pharmaceutical company. She wore elegant dresses, spoke with that refined southern accent that made everything sound like honey, and had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. When John mentioned he had a daughter, Denise's eyes lit up. "Oh, I just love children," she said, placing her hand on his arm. "I always wanted a family of my own, but the Lord had different plans for me. Maybe he was just waiting for the right time." John felt something shift in his chest. Maybe this was an answer to his prayers. They started dating slowly. Denise would come to Sunday dinners, bringing homemade peach cobbler that Isabella loved. She'd sit with Isabella and help her with her homework, never rushing, always patient. She took Isabella shopping for her first training bra, something John had been dreading, and came back with Isabella laughing and carrying bags full of clothes. She remembered Isabella's birthday, her favorite colors, the little things that mattered. John watched his daughter slowly open up to Denise, saw her smile more, heard her laugh again in a way she hadn't since her mother died. It felt like healing. After a year of dating, John proposed. It was at the same restaurant where he'd proposed to Patricia 15 years earlier, and this time Isabella was there, holding the ring box, grinning from ear to ear. Denise cried, said yes, and hugged Isabella first, before hugging John. "We're going to be a family," she whispered to Isabella. "You, me, and your daddy." The wedding was beautiful, held in the garden of their church with 200 guests. Isabella was the flower girl, wearing a lavender dress that Denise had picked out special. When John said his vows, he looked at both Denise and Isabella, promising to love and protect them both. He felt complete again. He felt like life was finally giving him a second chance at happiness. But baby, if he'd been paying closer attention, he might have noticed the small things. The way Denise's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she thought no one was looking. The phone calls she'd take in another room, lowering her voice. The way she'd ask detailed questions about John's business accounts, his investments, his estate planning. John thought she was just being interested in his life, wanting to understand his world. He had no idea she was studying it like a map, looking for the treasure. And then there was Marcus. Marcus Whitaker was born 2 years after John, and from childhood he'd always lived in his older brother's shadow. Where John was driven and focused, Marcus was charming but aimless. Where John built things, Marcus talked about building things. Their mother used to say Marcus could sell ice to an Eskimo, but he could never quite close the deal. After college, Marcus bounced from job to job, always having an excuse for why things didn't work out. John, being the big brother he was, never gave up on Marcus. He brought him into Whitaker Construction as a partner, gave him a 20% stake in the company, paid him a salary of $300,000 a year for work that most folks could have done in half the time. Marcus played his role perfectly. He showed up to the office, sat in on meetings, took clients to lunch. He called John brother, with that wide smile, always ready with advice, always positioning himself as John's right-hand man. But behind closed doors, Marcus resented every bit of it. He hated that John was the successful one, the respected one, the one their mother had been so proud of before she passed. He hated that he needed John's charity to maintain his lifestyle, his downtown loft, his luxury car, his expensive tastes. And most of all, he hated that John's will left everything to Isabella, with Marcus only getting a small trust fund. 20 million felt like scraps when there was 40 million on the table. When Denise came into the picture, Marcus saw an opportunity. They met at the engagement party, and there was an instant recognition between them. Two people who wanted more than they had. Two people willing to do whatever it took to get it. They started meeting for coffee, then lunch, then secret dinners at hotels outside the city. The affair started 6 months before the wedding, but it wasn't just about passion, it was about planning. They'd sit in those hotel rooms and talk about John's assets, about the business structure, about how the will was set up. Denise had access to John's documents, his passwords, his private files. She'd photograph everything and share it with Marcus. If something happened to John, you'd get your 20%, but that child gets everything else, Marcus said one night, swirling his bourbon. That's not right. You're his brother. You built this with him. Denise leaned back, her mind already working. And I'm his wife, but with that child in the picture, I'd only get a portion too. The bulk goes to her, held in trust until she's 25. They looked at each other, and something evil was born in that moment, something that would destroy innocent lives without a second thought. The plan took months to develop. It had to look natural, had to be beyond suspicion. They couldn't just make John disappear because that would trigger investigations, audits, questions. But if something happened to Isabella first, something tragic that no one could prevent, John would be devastated. Vulnerable, easier to manipulate, and then, if John's health mysteriously declined over time, if he died of what appeared to be natural causes brought on by grief and stress, well, who would question that? A man dying of a broken heart after losing his only child. It happened all the time. Denise suggested the cabin weekend. She'd owned that property for years, a rustic place she'd inherited from an uncle, far enough from the city that neighbors were sparse. She told John it would be good bonding time, just her and Isabella, building their stepmother and stepdaughter relationship. John thought it was thoughtful. He packed Isabella's bag himself, included her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear she'd had since she was 3. He kissed her forehead that Friday morning and told her, "You have fun with Denise, baby girl. I'll see you Sunday night." Isabella hugged him tight, tighter than usual, and later John would remember that and wonder if some part of her knew. That Friday night, Denise drove Isabella to the cabin. They made popcorn, watched movies, and acted like everything was normal. But Saturday morning, Denise's demeanor changed. She told Isabella to pack her things, that they were going somewhere else. When Isabella asked where, Denise's voice turned cold. "Don't ask questions. Just do what I say." The sweetness was gone, replaced by something that made Isabella's stomach twist with fear. They drove for over an hour, finally stopping at an old farmhouse that looked abandoned. Marcus was waiting there. Isabella recognized Uncle Marcus and felt relief for just a moment. "Uncle Marcus, what are you doing here? Is Daddy with you?" Marcus didn't answer. He just grabbed her arm, not gently like he used to, and pulled her toward the house. Isabella started to cry, started to struggle, but Denise gripped her other arm. "The more you fight, the worse this will be," Denise hissed. They took her down to a basement, a cold concrete room with one small window near the ceiling, bars on the outside. There was a mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and nothing else. Isabella screamed, begged them to tell her what was happening, but Marcus just locked the door and walked away. The last thing Isabella heard was Denise's voice, cold as winter, saying, "Your daddy's about to learn what real loss feels like." Back at the cabin, Marcus poured gasoline through every room, while Denise arranged Isabella's belongings strategically. Her backpack in what would be the bedroom area, her shoes near what would be the remains of the couch. They took something else too, something that would make identification seem certain. Hair from Isabella's brush, placed carefully where the fire would char, but not completely destroy. Dental records could be requested, but with a grieving father who'd want to spare himself more pain and remains too damaged for visual identification, DNA from hair would be enough. Marcus lit the match at 3:15 Saturday afternoon. By 3:30, the cabin was an inferno. By 4, the fire department was responding to calls. By 5, John's world was ending. The performance that followed deserves an Oscar. Denise collapsed when the police told her, had to be sedated. She sobbed through the entire investigation, blaming herself over and over. "I should have been there. I should have stayed with her. This is my fault." Marcus held John upright at the morgue, his face a mask of shared grief. "We'll get through this, brother. We're family. I'm not leaving your side." The community rallied around them. Meals were delivered to the house, cards and flowers piled up. The church held multiple prayer vigils. John couldn't function. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely speak. His daughter was gone, and the pain was so immense it felt physical, like someone had reached into his chest and ripped out his heart. During those first weeks, Denise played the devoted wife perfectly. She'd bring John tea in the morning, something to help him sleep at night. Small meals she insisted he try to eat. "You have to keep your strength up, honey," she'd say softly, stroking his hair. What John didn't know was that the tea contained small doses of antifreeze, ethylene glycol, tasteless and odorless. Not enough to kill him quickly. That would be suspicious. Just enough to make him sick over time, to attack his kidneys and liver slowly, to make it look like his body was shutting down from grief and depression. Marcus would visit daily, taking over business operations, slowly positioning himself to have more control, more access, more authority. The funeral was held 3 weeks after the fire. The coroner had released what they believed were Isabella's remains, though they encouraged a closed casket given the condition. John stood at that small white casket and felt like he was drowning. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Denise stood beside him in black, veiled, the picture of the grieving stepmother. Marcus delivered a eulogy that had half the church in tears, talking about Isabella's sweet spirit, her intelligence, her love for her father. "She was taken too soon," he said, his voice breaking at all the right moments. "But we will honor her memory by taking care of John, by making sure her father knows he's not alone." After the funeral, life became a fog for John. Days blended together. He'd wake up feeling nauseous, his body aching, his mind clouded. Denise would explain it away as depression, grief manifesting physically. She'd schedule doctor's appointments, but always went with him, always spoke to the doctors privately first, explaining that her husband was struggling emotionally and might not be forthcoming about his mental state. The doctors prescribed antidepressants, sleeping pills, and anxiety medication, more chemicals in John's system, making it harder to think clearly, harder to notice what was happening. But baby, behind every perfect lie, there's always one crack. And this crack came in the form of a 12-year-old girl who refused to give up. Isabella spent 2 months in that basement, living in conditions that would break most adults. She was fed once a day, plain bread and water, barely enough to survive. She wasn't allowed to shower. The bucket in the corner was her only bathroom. She lost weight, her clothes hanging off her frame, but her mind stayed sharp. She listened to every conversation she could hear through the floorboards. She studied the patterns of when Marcus and Denise would visit. She noticed that there was always a 2-day gap, usually over weekends, when no one came at all, meaning they had to travel to get here. And on one of those weekends, 2 months into her captivity, Isabella decided she wasn't going to die in that basement. She was going to fight. She was going to survive. And she was going to save her father, because even at 12 years old, even after everything she'd endured, she loved him more than she feared what Denise and Marcus might do to her. That morning, that cold November morning when John knelt at her grave, Isabella had escaped through that small window using a stack of books Marcus had carelessly left behind during one of his visits. She squeezed through bars that had rusted enough to bend, dropped 8 feet onto hard ground, and ran. She ran until her bare feet bled, until her lungs burned, until she reached that cemetery where she knew her father would be because he went there every morning like clockwork. And there, hidden behind that oak tree, watching her daddy break into 1,000 pieces over a lie, Isabella understood something that would fuel everything that came next. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like family. Sometimes it smiles at you across the dinner table while planning your destruction. And sometimes, just sometimes, love is strong enough to survive even that. Now, let me take you inside that basement prison where Isabella spent 63 days of her young life, 63 days of darkness, fear, and questions that had no answers. The room was maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with concrete walls that wept moisture and a ceiling so low that Marcus had to duck when he came down the stairs. That small window near the ceiling was her only source of natural light, and through it, she could see just a sliver of sky. On clear days, she'd watch the clouds pass by and imagine she was anywhere but there. The mattress they'd given her smelled like mildew and old sweat, probably pulled from some storage unit or dumpster. The blanket was thin, barely enough to keep her warm on cold nights, and she'd curl up in a ball, trying to preserve whatever body heat she had left. But the physical discomfort wasn't what broke Isabella down. It was not knowing. Why was this happening? What had she done wrong? Where was her father? And did he think she was really dead? Did he cry for her? Did he blame himself? These questions circled in her mind like vultures, day after day, hour after hour. She'd talk to herself sometimes, just to hear a voice, even if it was her own. She'd recite her multiplication tables, something her mother had taught her years ago. She'd sing lullabies Patricia used to sing, her voice cracking with tears. And every single night, before she closed her eyes, she'd whisper the same prayer. God, please let Daddy know I'm alive. Please don't let him give up. Please help me get home. For the first month, Isabella barely saw Denise or Marcus. They'd come every 3 or 4 days, usually Marcus alone. He'd unlock the door, slide a paper bag with bread, maybe an apple, and 2 bottles of water across the floor like she was a dog, then leave without saying a word. Isabella would call out to him, "Uncle Marcus, please, why are you doing this? I won't tell anyone anything, just let me go home." But he never responded. His face stayed blank, emotionless, like she wasn't even human to him anymore. Once, she tried rushing the door when he opened it, thinking maybe she could slip past him. Marcus caught her by the hair and threw her back so hard she hit the concrete wall. She had a bruise on her shoulder for 2 weeks after that. She never tried again. But on day 57, something changed. It was late evening. Isabella could tell by the way the light through the window had turned orange, then faded to dark. She was lying on the mattress, too hungry to sleep but too exhausted to stay awake, existing in that terrible in-between state. That's when she heard it. Voices upstairs. Not just one voice but 2, Marcus and Denise. They were laughing. Actually laughing. The sound of it made Isabella's stomach turn. She sat up slowly, her heart beginning to pound. The floorboards above her head creaked as they moved around, and she could hear glasses clinking, like they were having drinks, celebrating something. Isabella crept to the bottom of the stairs, the old wooden steps that led up to the locked door. There was a gap, maybe an inch, between the door and the floor, and if she pressed her ear right up against it, she could hear them more clearly. Her hands were shaking. Part of her didn't want to hear what they were saying, but another part, the part that needed to understand, needed to know the truth, that part made her listen. 2 months already, Marcus, Denise said, her voice slurred slightly, like she'd had a few drinks. Can you believe it's been 2 months? And that fool still has no idea. Marcus laughed. That smooth, easy laugh Isabella had heard 100 times at family dinners. The man's a wreck, Denise. I've never seen John like this. He can barely get out of bed most days. Walks around that big house like a ghost. There was a pause, the sound of liquid pouring, probably more wine. How's he looking health-wise? Is the special ingredient working? Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Special ingredient? What were they talking about? Denise laughed, and it was the coldest sound Isabella had ever heard. This wasn't the woman who used to braid her hair and help her with homework. This was someone else entirely, someone wearing Denise's face but hollow inside. Oh, it's working beautifully. His kidney function is declining, his liver enzymes are elevated, the doctors are baffled, running tests, but they keep coming back to stress and depression as the cause. One of them even suggested it might be psychosomatic, that his grief is literally killing him. She paused, and Isabella could almost hear the smile in her voice. I give him that special tea every morning and every night. Tells him it'll help him sleep, help with his anxiety. Poor baby doesn't know he's drinking his own death sentence, 1 cup at a time. Isabella clapped her hand over her mouth to keep from gasping out loud. Poison. Denise was poisoning her father. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted with his home and his heart, was slowly killing him. Tears started streaming down Isabella's face, hot and fast, but she couldn't make a sound. If they knew she could hear them, if they knew she'd discovered their plan, they might kill her right now, or worse, they might hurt her father faster. She bit down on her fist, tasting blood, forcing herself to stay silent. Marcus's voice came through again, satisfied and cruel. You know what the best part is? John signed those updated documents last week, the ones I brought him. Didn't even read them thoroughly, just trusted his little brother. Now, if something happens to him, his assets don't go into probate hell. Everything's clean, divided between you and me, exactly 50-50. The lawyers won't question it because they watched him sign it himself. He paused, then added, though I still can't believe he actually bought that. Grief made him too emotional to review contracts carefully. The man built a $40 million empire, but love made him stupid. They both laughed at that. Actually laughed. Isabella felt something inside her shift, something that replaced fear with rage. These people, these monsters wearing familiar faces, were talking about murdering her father like it was a business deal. Like his life meant nothing. Like her life had meant nothing. She pressed her ear harder against the gap, desperate to hear more, to understand the full scope of what they'd done. I still remember his face at the funeral, Denise said, her tone mocking. The way he broke down at that tiny casket, sobbing like the world was ending. I almost felt bad for a second. Almost. She laughed again. But then I thought about $40 million and a life free from playing stepmommy to a whiny little girl, and that feeling passed real quick. Marcus clinked his glass against hers. To John's beautiful, grieving widow. You played that role perfectly, baby. Even I almost believed those tears were real. Please, Denise scoffed. I've been practicing fake tears since I was 15. It's all about thinking of something that makes you emotional right before you need to cry. I just picture my bank account after this is all over, and waterworks happen naturally. More laughter, more clinking glasses, more proof that Isabella's entire world had been built on lies. But then Marcus said something that made Isabella's blood run cold. How much longer do you think he's got? I mean, we're 2 months in. The poison's working, but it's slow. I thought he'd be gone by now. Denise's voice turned clinical, detached. Another month, maybe 6 weeks at most. We can't speed it up too much or it'll look suspicious. But trust me, his body's shutting down. Last week he collapsed in his office. They had to call an ambulance. The doctors are starting to talk about organ failure, possibly recommending hospice soon. Once he's in hospice, we're golden. People die in hospice all the time. No one questions it. Isabella pulled back from the door, her whole body shaking. Another month. 6 weeks. Her father had 6 weeks to live if she didn't do something. 6 weeks before Denise and Marcus succeeded in stealing everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built, everything he was. And Isabella would remain dead to the world, either locked in this basement forever or eventually killed when she was no longer useful as leverage or insurance. She stumbled back to the mattress and curled up in a ball, trying to process what she'd heard. Part of her wanted to scream, to pound on that door and call them every name she could think of. But she knew that would be suicide. They'd already shown they were capable of murder. What would stop them from finishing what they started with her? She was just a loose end, a problem they'd deal with eventually. The only reason she was still alive was probably because they wanted to make sure John was dead first, to make sure there were no unexpected complications. Isabella lay there in the darkness, tears soaking the dirty pillow, and something crystallized in her mind. She couldn't wait for rescue. No one was looking for her. Everyone thought she was dead. Her father thought she was dead. If she was going to survive, if she was going to save her father, she had to save herself first. She had to get out of this basement, had to warn John, had to expose what Denise and Marcus had done. But how? She was 12 years old, malnourished, weakened from 2 months of captivity. The door was locked from the outside. The window was small and had bars. There were no weapons, no tools, nothing she could use. But then she remembered something. About 3 weeks ago, Marcus had brought down a box of old books, probably to shut her up because she'd been crying loudly and he'd gotten annoyed. Here, he snapped. Read these and be quiet. Isabella had been so grateful for something to do, anything to occupy her mind, that she'd read every single one, some of them twice. But those books, they were hardcovers, heavy. She'd stacked them in the corner to use as a makeshift table. Now, looking at them with new eyes, she realized they could be something else. A ladder, a way to reach that window. The window was about 7 feet off the ground, maybe 8. If she stacked the books carefully, if she could climb up without the stack toppling, she might be able to reach it. And those bars, she'd noticed weeks ago that they were old, rusted in places. Metal that's rusted is weaker. If she could work on them, quietly, patiently, over days if necessary, maybe she could bend them enough to squeeze through. It wasn't much of a plan. It probably wouldn't work, but it was something. It was hope, and hope was all she had left. Isabella spent the next 6 days preparing. Every moment that Denise and Marcus weren't in the house, she'd stack those books, climb up, and work on the bars. She'd use the edge of the metal bed frame from the old mattress, a piece that had broken off, and she'd scrape at the rust, working the bars back and forth, testing their give. Her hands got cut, her arms ached. But slowly, painfully slowly, she felt them loosening. The middle 2 bars, the ones that would give her the widest space to squeeze through, were moving more each day. Just a little, just enough to matter. On the morning of day 63, Isabella woke up to silence. Complete silence. Usually she could hear movement upstairs, footsteps, television, something. But today, nothing. She waited an hour, then 2. No one came. This was it. This was her window. Marcus and Denise must have both gone somewhere, probably back to Atlanta to keep up appearances, to continue playing their roles. Isabella's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. This was the chance she'd been praying for. God had given her an opening, and she couldn't waste it. She dragged the stack of books beneath the window, climbed up carefully, her legs shaking. The bars she'd been working on were loose. She could feel it. She gripped them both and pulled with everything she had. Her hands slipped, bloodied from old cuts reopening. She didn't care. She pulled again, harder, putting her entire body weight into it. The bars creaked, groaned, and then, oh Lord, they bent. Not much, but enough. Maybe enough. Isabella's breath came in short gasps. She grabbed the window frame and pulled herself up, pushing her head through first. The space was tight, so tight she thought for a moment she'd gotten stuck. Panic flooded her. But she twisted her shoulders, scraped her skin against the rough concrete and metal, and pushed through. Her hips caught. She wiggled, pushed, tears streaming down her face, praying, begging God for just a few more inches of space. And then she was through, tumbling out of that window onto the cold ground outside. She landed hard on her side, knocking the wind out of her lungs. For a moment, she just lay there, gasping, staring up at the sky, a sky she hadn't seen clearly in 2 months. It was late afternoon, the sun starting its descent, and the air was cold, biting into her skin. But it was fresh air. Real air. Freedom. Isabella forced herself to stand. Her legs felt weak, shaky. She looked around and realized she had no idea where she was. Trees surrounded the old farmhouse, bare from late autumn. No other buildings in sight, no roads she could see. She knew Atlanta was south, but which direction was south? She looked up at the sun, trying to remember something her father had taught her years ago on a camping trip. The sun sets in the west. If she kept the sun to her right, she'd be heading south. Maybe, hopefully. She started walking, then running, her bare feet hitting the cold ground. Sticks and stones cut into her soles, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Every second she stayed near that house was a second closer to Marcus or Denise coming back and finding her gone. They'd hunt her down. They'd kill her this time, no question. Isabella ran until her lungs burned, until her vision blurred, until she thought she might collapse. But every time she wanted to stop, she'd picture her father's face, picture him dying alone while those monsters celebrated, and she'd find strength she didn't know she had. The woods seemed endless. Hours passed. The sun set, and darkness fell, making every shadow look like a person, every sound like footsteps following her. Isabella's mind played tricks on her, showing her Denise's face in the trees, Marcus's hands reaching out to grab her. She'd cry out, stumble, fall, then get back up and keep moving. Her feet were bleeding, leaving prints she prayed no one would find. Her body screamed for rest, for water, for anything. But she pushed on, driven by love and terror in equal measure. And that's when she realized, Lord have mercy, none of this was a dream. This was her life, her real, actual life. She was 12 years old, running through the woods at night, bleeding and terrified, trying to save her father from being murdered by his own family. This wasn't something that happened in movies or books. This was happening to her, right now. The weight of it almost crushed her. But Isabella Whitaker was her father's daughter, and John hadn't built an empire by giving up when things got hard, so neither would she. The night swallowed Isabella whole. No moon, just stars that barely gave enough light to see 3 feet ahead. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and Isabella's thin clothes, the same ones she'd been wearing for 2 months, did nothing to protect her. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. Every breath felt like ice in her lungs, but she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant freezing and freezing meant dying, and she hadn't come this far to give up now. Around what she guessed was midnight, Isabella came to a small stream. The water was so cold it hurt to touch, but she was desperately thirsty. She cupped her hands and drank, the water shocking her system but giving her a moment of relief. She wanted to rest, just for a minute, but she knew if she sat down she might not get back up. Instead, she splashed water on her face, trying to clear her mind, trying to stay alert. That's when she heard it. A car in the distance, an engine. Civilization. She was getting close to somewhere. Isabella followed the sound, pushing through brush that tore at her arms and face. And finally, after what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, she saw lights. A gas station, glowing like heaven itself on a small highway. She wanted to cry with relief. But she stopped herself, staying in the tree line, watching. What if Marcus and Denise had people looking for her? What if they'd reported her as a runaway or dangerous? She couldn't trust anyone yet. She needed to get to her father first, needed to warn him before Denise gave him his morning tea laced with death. There was a payphone outside the gas station, one of the old ones that somehow still existed. Isabella had seen her father use his calling card once and knew the number was stored on it. But she didn't have the card. She didn't have anything. Then she remembered something else. If you dial 0, you can make an emergency collect call. The operator would ask the person if they'd accept charges. Her father would recognize her name. He'd accept. He had to. Isabella waited until no one was around, then sprinted from the trees to the phone. Her hands shook as she lifted the receiver and dialed 0. An operator answered, professional and detached. "How may I help you?" Isabella's voice came out as a whisper, hoarse from not speaking much in 2 months. "I need to make a collect call, please. It's an emergency." The operator asked for the number. Isabella rattled off her father's cell phone number, the one she'd memorized when she was 6. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. "Please, Daddy, please pick up, please." But it went to voicemail. John's voice, tired and sad, said, "You've reached John Whitaker. I'm not available. Leave a message." Isabella's heart sank. She tried the house number instead. Same thing. No answer. She realized what time it was. 3 in the morning. Her father was probably asleep, probably drugged with whatever Denise had given him before bed, and Denise was probably right there next to him. If Isabella left a message, Denise might hear it first, might delete it. No, she had to get there in person, had to see her father face to face. Isabella hung up the phone and looked at the gas station. There was a bus stop sign nearby. She walked over, studied the route map behind scratched plexiglass. One of the routes went into Atlanta, dropped near the financial district. From there, she knew how to get to her father's office building, then to the house. But she didn't have money for the bus. The first bus would come at 5:30 in the morning. She had 2.5 hours to wait. Isabella looked around and spotted an alcove next to the gas station where they stored propane tanks. She squeezed herself behind them, out of sight, and tried to stay warm, tried to stay awake, tried not to think about Marcus and Denise discovering her empty prison. While Isabella fought to survive the night, John Whitaker lay in his bed 20 miles away, his body racked with pain he couldn't explain. His joints ached, his head pounded, nausea rolled through him in waves. He'd thrown up twice that evening, and Denise had been so concerned, so attentive. "Baby, you need to see a specialist," she'd said, stroking his hair. "This grief is eating you alive from the inside." John had just nodded weakly. He thought she was right. He thought his body was breaking down because his heart was already broken. How could he live without his daughter? What was the point of any of this? Denise had brought him his special tea before bed, the chamomile blend that supposedly helped him sleep. John drank it because she insisted, because he was too tired to argue. What he didn't see was the small bottle Denise pulled from her pocket after he'd drifted off, the bottle she tucked back into her purse. Ethylene glycol. Sweet antifreeze. Just a few drops each day. Not enough to kill quickly, but enough to destroy organs slowly. to make it look like his grief had manifested as physical illness. The doctors were already talking about kidney failure, possibly dialysis. Denise played the worried wife, asking about prognosis, about comfort care, about what happens when a patient decides they don't want aggressive treatment. Marcus came by the house early that morning, before dawn. He let himself in with his key and went straight to John's home office. He had papers to sign, documents that would transfer even more control to Marcus before John became too ill to make decisions. Insurance policies, business contracts, real estate transfers. Marcus had spent weeks carefully crafting these documents, making them look legitimate enough to pass legal scrutiny, but structured to benefit him the moment John died. He spread them on the desk, practiced his concerned brother's voice in the mirror. "John, I hate to bother you with this, but these need your signature. I'll handle everything else. You just rest." But while Marcus practiced his lies, Isabella was climbing onto that first bus as soon as it arrived, hiding in the back, praying the driver wouldn't ask for payment before they got to the city. The bus was mostly empty at that hour, just a few workers heading to early shifts. The driver, an older black man with kind eyes, looked at Isabella in the rearview mirror. He saw her bare feet, her dirty clothes, the cuts on her face and arms. He didn't say anything, just shook his head sadly and drove. When Isabella got off at her stop, he called after her, "Hey, little sister, you take care of yourself, you hear?" Isabella nodded, tears in her eyes, and ran. She knew these streets, knew every shortcut from years of visiting her father at work. She ran past the financial district, cut through Grant Park, came out on the street where her father's mansion sat behind iron gates. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky orange and pink. Isabella's feet left bloody prints on the sidewalk. Her lungs felt like they were on fire. But there it was, home, the tall brick house with white columns, the garden her mother had planted, the windows of her bedroom on the second floor. She wanted to collapse right there and sob, but she forced herself forward, up to the gate, pressing the call button frantically. Silence. Then a crackling voice through the intercom. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. "Yes? Who is it?" Isabella's voice broke. "Mrs. Chen, it's me. It's Isabella. Please, I need to see my dad." A long pause. Then Mrs. Chen's voice, shaking, confused, frightened. "Who is this? This isn't funny. Isabella is deceased." Isabella pressed her face against the intercom. "Mrs. Chen, please, it's really me. I'm not dead. I escaped." They were lying. Denise and Uncle Marcus, they kidnapped me. "Please, you have to let me in. You have to help me." Another pause, longer this time. Then the gate buzzed and swung open. Isabella ran up the driveway, and there at the front door stood Mrs. Chen, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide as moons. The older woman stared at Isabella like seeing a ghost, and honestly, that's what she looked like. Dirty, bleeding, thin as a rail, barefoot, but alive, undeniably alive. Mrs. Chen crossed herself and whispered, "Sweet Jesus." Then she grabbed Isabella and pulled her inside, hugging her so tight Isabella couldn't breathe. "Child, what happened to you?" "How are you here? We buried you." "Where's my dad?" Isabella asked urgently. "I need to see him now." Before Denise. As if summoned by her name, Denise appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a silk robe, her hair perfect even at dawn. She was carrying a tray with a teacup, probably the morning dose of poison meant for John. When she saw Isabella standing in the foyer, alive and real, the tray slipped from her hands, the cup shattered on the marble floor, tea spreading like blood. Denise's face went through a journey of emotions in 3 seconds: shock, fear, calculation, then a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Isabella," she said, her voice too high, too bright. "Oh my God, Isabella, you're alive!" John, come quick." She started down the stairs, but Isabella backed away, positioning herself behind Mrs. Chen. "Don't come near me," Isabella said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I know what you did. I know everything." Denise froze on the stairs. Her mask slipped just a bit, just enough for Mrs. Chen to notice. The housekeeper, who'd worked for this family for 15 years, who'd watched Isabella grow up, who'd mourned her death, looked between the girl and Denise with growing understanding. That's when John appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the commotion. He was wearing pajamas, his face pale and drawn, his body thin from 2 months of illness. He looked like a man at death's door. But when he saw Isabella, when his eyes registered that his daughter was standing in his foyer, alive and real and looking up at him, John's face transformed. The grief vanished, replaced by something that can only be described as resurrection. He whispered her name like a prayer. Isabella, and baby, what happened next? I need you to understand how powerful a father's love can be. John Whitaker, a man who could barely walk from his bedroom to his bathroom without getting winded, ran down those stairs. He moved faster than he had in months, like God himself had given him temporary strength. He nearly fell, caught himself on the railing, and then he was kneeling on the floor, his arms around his daughter, holding her like if he let go she'd disappear forever. Isabella buried her face in her father's chest and sobbed. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried to get back sooner." John couldn't speak. He just held her, rocking back and forth, tears pouring down his face, his whole body shaking. "You're here. You're real. You're alive." Behind them, Denise tried to take control of the situation. "John, honey, we should call the police, call the doctors. We need to understand what happened. Maybe she was confused, maybe trauma." But Isabella pulled back from her father and pointed at Denise with a shaking finger. "She did this, Daddy. Her and Uncle Marcus. They kidnapped me. They faked my death. And they've been poisoning you." She looked into her father's eyes and spoke clearly, firmly, making sure he heard every word. "That tea she gives you every day, it has poison in it. They're trying to kill you so they can take everything. I heard them talking about it. They laughed about you crying at my funeral. They're planning to split your money as soon as you die." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. John slowly turned his head to look at Denise, and the expression on his face was one I hope to never see on any human being. It was rage and betrayal and heartbreak all mixed into something that looked like it might kill him right then and there. Denise backed up the stairs, shaking her head. "No, John, that's not true. The child is confused, traumatized. She doesn't know what she's saying." But her voice wavered, her hands trembled, and John saw it. He saw the lie. Mrs. Chen spoke up, her voice hard. "That tea, the special tea you always made for Mr. Whitaker. You never let anyone else prepare it. You said it was a family recipe." Denise's face flushed. "It is a family recipe. This is ridiculous. I would never hurt John. I love him." Isabella's voice cut through the lies like a knife. "You don't love him. You told Uncle Marcus that playing stepmommy to a whiny little girl was worth $40 million. I heard you. I heard everything." John stood slowly, pulling Isabella behind him protectively. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but filled with venom. "Get out of my house." Denise started to protest, but John roared, "Get out of my house right now, or I swear to God I will kill you where you stand." Mrs. Chen was already on the phone with the police. Denise realized the game was over. She ran up the stairs, grabbed her purse from the bedroom, and fled out the back door before the sirens got close. John didn't care about chasing her. All he cared about was the miracle standing next to him, bruised and battered but alive. He knelt back down and held Isabella's face in his hands. "Baby girl, what did they do to you? Where have you been?" Isabella told him everything. The cabin, the basement, the 2 months of captivity, Marcus bringing food, the conversations she'd overheard, her escape through the window, the night in the woods, the long journey home. With every word, John's expression grew darker, his jaw clenching tighter. When she finished, he pulled her close again and whispered, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have protected you. I should have known." "You couldn't have known, Daddy," Isabella said. "They fooled everyone." John pulled back and looked at his daughter with a mix of pride and pain. "You saved my life. You know that? If you hadn't escaped, if you hadn't warned me, I'd be dead in a few weeks. You saved your old man." Isabella managed a small smile. "You've saved me 1,000 times, Daddy. I owed you one." The police arrived within minutes, and John told them everything. They searched the house and found the bottle of ethylene glycol hidden in Denise's cosmetics bag in the master bathroom. They found text messages on a burner phone, conversations between Denise and Marcus planning every detail. The case was airtight, but Denise and Marcus were gone, vanished before the law could touch them. John didn't care. They'd run the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. What mattered was Isabella was home. But as the day wore on, As doctors examined Isabella and treated her injuries, as police took statements and collected evidence, John realized something. Denise and Marcus knew he was alive now. They knew Isabella had exposed them. They might be desperate enough to try something else, to eliminate the witnesses before the trial. John couldn't let that happen. He had to protect his daughter, and he had to make sure those two faced justice. That's when an idea formed, an idea so wild it might actually work. That evening, after Isabella had showered, eaten her first real meal in 2 months, and fallen asleep in her own bed with John sitting next to her like a guard dog, John made a phone call to his lawyer, his real lawyer, not the one Marcus had been manipulating. "Timothy, I need your help with something that's going to sound insane, but I need you to trust me." He explained his plan, and Timothy was silent for a long moment before responding, "John, that's incredibly risky." John looked at his sleeping daughter and replied, "They almost took everything from me. Now it's my turn to take everything from them." The plan was simple but required perfect timing. John would fake his death, stage it so convincingly that Denise and Marcus would believe they'd won, that the poison had finally worked. They'd come out of hiding for the will reading, for the inheritance they'd killed for, and when they showed up, thinking they were about to become rich beyond their dreams, John and Isabella would expose them in front of everyone, with evidence, recordings, and most importantly, the testimony of a girl who refused to stay dead. It was risky. It was potentially dangerous. But John Whitaker hadn't built an empire by playing it safe, and if you think the first part of this story was intense, baby, you haven't seen anything yet. The plan John and his lawyer Timothy put together was meticulous, every detail calculated down to the minute. They had 1 week to pull it off, 1 week to make it so convincing that Denise and Marcus would crawl out from whatever hole they'd been hiding in. First, John needed to actually look like he was dying, and honestly, after 2 months of being poisoned, that part wasn't hard. He stopped taking the medications the hospital had prescribed once they'd flushed the toxins from his system, just enough to keep himself looking weak and sick. He lost more weight, his skin took on a grayish tone. He moved slowly, painfully, whenever anyone but Timothy and Isabella were around. Isabella was the hardest part of the plan. She had to go back into hiding, and had to pretend she'd never come home. It broke John's heart to ask her to hide again after everything she'd been through, but Isabella understood. "Daddy, if they know I'm alive, they'll run forever. We have to make them think they won." So Isabella stayed in a safe house Timothy arranged, a condo owned by one of his law partners across town, with 24-hour security. Mrs. Chen was the only staff member who knew the truth, and she guarded that secret like her life depended on it, because it did. 3 days after Isabella's return, John was admitted to the hospital. Timothy made sure the right doctors were involved, doctors who understood what was really happening but played along. They admitted John for acute kidney failure, liver damage, and a prognosis that made everyone in the hospital whisper. "The man's dying of a broken heart," nurses said in the hallways. "Lost his daughter, and now his body's just giving up." John's hospital room became a parade of visitors. Business partners came to pay respects. Church members prayed over him. And Marcus, playing the devoted brother, showed up every single day, sitting by John's bedside with crocodile tears in his eyes. "I'm here, brother," Marcus would say, holding John's hand. "I'm not going anywhere. You fight this? You hear me? Isabella wouldn't want you to give up." John wanted to strangle him right there in that hospital bed. The audacity of this man to speak his daughter's name, the daughter he'd kidnapped and imprisoned, while pretending to care about John's life, the life he'd been actively trying to end. But John played his part perfectly. He'd squeeze Marcus's hand weakly and whisper, "Take care of the business, Marcus. You're all I have left." And Marcus, that snake, would nod solemnly and assure John that everything was being handled. Denise was harder to track. She'd disappeared after fleeing the house, and the police had a warrant out for her arrest. But Timothy had resources, investigators who were very good at their jobs. They found her staying at a luxury hotel in Savannah under a fake name, paying cash, keeping a low profile. When word reached her through Marcus that John was in the hospital dying, really dying this time, she couldn't resist. She called Marcus from a burner phone, and Timothy's team intercepted the call. "Is he really going?" she asked, her voice eager, hungry. Marcus replied, "Days, maybe a week at most, The doctors are saying his organs are shutting down. We just have to wait it out, baby. On day 6, at 4:37 in the morning, John Whitaker was pronounced dead. The doctor on duty, one of Timothy's carefully selected allies, called it time of death, 4:37 a.m., cause of death, multiple organ failure secondary to toxic exposure and acute psychological distress. The death certificate was signed, official, filed with the county. By 8 a.m., the news had spread. Local news stations picked it up. Prominent Atlanta businessman John Whitaker has died at age 48, 2 months after the tragic death of his daughter. Social media exploded with condolences. The business community mourned. And somewhere in Savannah, Denise smiled. The funeral was held 4 days later at the same church where they'd held Isabella's memorial service just 2 months prior. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the truth. The church was packed, standing room only. John's casket, closed at the family's request, sat at the front surrounded by more flowers than could fit in the space. Photos of John throughout his life decorated easels. John as a young man, John with Patricia, John holding baby Isabella. It was a shrine to a life cut short by treachery. Marcus played his role like he was born for it. He stood at the front of the church in a black suit, his face a mask of devastation, and delivered a eulogy that would have won awards. "My brother was my hero," he said, his voice breaking at precisely the right moments. "He raised me when our father died. He gave me opportunities I never could have had without him. He was generous, kind, and the best father I've ever seen." People in the pews cried. Some stood and applauded Marcus for being so strong in his grief. If only they knew. And then Denise showed up. She arrived late, wearing black from head to toe, a veil covering her face, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She slipped into a back pew, thinking she was being discreet, but Timothy's people spotted her immediately. They didn't approach. They just watched. Denise sat through the entire service, and at one point, she actually wiped away tears. Tears for a man she'd poisoned for months. Tears for a husband whose only crime was loving her. The woman had the audacity to cry at his funeral while wearing stolen jewelry, a diamond necklace John had given her for their first anniversary, probably already calculating its resale value. After the service, after John's casket was loaded into the hearse and driven to the cemetery, after they lowered an empty box into the ground, next to the empty grave marked with Isabella's name, Marcus and Denise met at a hotel room downtown. They thought they'd been careful. They thought no one was watching. But Timothy had cameras, audio, everything. The recording of that meeting would later be played in court, and let me tell you, it was damning. "We did it," Marcus said, popping a bottle of champagne. "That fool is finally dead, and we're about to be rich beyond our wildest dreams." Denise laughed, that cold, heartless laugh, and raised her glass. "To John, the easiest mark I ever played. The man was so desperate for love after his wife died that he never questioned anything. I could have asked him to sign over his company on our wedding night and he probably would have done it." They toasted, kissed, and spent the next hour planning how they'd spend their inheritance. Marcus wanted a yacht. Denise wanted a villa in Italy. They talked about John like he was a business transaction they'd successfully closed, not a human being they'd murdered. 2 weeks after the funeral, the official will reading was scheduled. Timothy had made sure it was a big production, held in the main conference room of the courthouse, with multiple attorneys present, a judge, and witnesses required by law. Marcus showed up in a custom suit, looking like he'd already spent some of his inheritance. Denise wore designer everything, her hair and makeup perfect, playing the grieving widow while wearing colors that were just a little too bright. They sat at the conference table looking smug, confident, arrogant. They'd won. John was dead. Isabella was dead. The money was theirs. The judge, an older black woman named Judge Valerie Thompson, who'd known John for years and had been briefed on the situation, presided over the reading. "We're here for the probate of John Whitaker's estate," she began, her voice formal and detached. "The deceased's will, updated 3 months prior to his death, names Marcus Whitaker and Denise Crawford Whitaker as primary beneficiaries." Marcus squeezed Denise's hand under the table. Denise smiled softly, playing her part beautifully. Timothy began reading the will, the fake one Marcus had tricked John into signing, outlining the division of assets. 50% to Marcus, 50% to Denise. The house, the business, the investments, the bank accounts. Everything split down the middle. Denise actually started crying again, these fake, theatrical tears. He was so generous, she whispered to no one in particular. Even in death, he took care of his family. Marcus nodded solemnly. That was my brother, always thinking of others. Judge Thompson looked at them over her reading glasses, and something in her expression should have warned them. Before we finalize this distribution, I need to ask if there are any objections or new evidence that should be presented to this court. Timothy stood up. Your Honor, there is new evidence. Critical evidence that changes everything. Marcus's face flickered with concern for just a second. What evidence? My brother's will is clear. Timothy walked to the doors of the conference room and opened them. I'd like to present 2 witnesses who have testimony relevant to this case. And then, baby, this is the moment you've been waiting for. This is the moment where justice stops playing nice. John Whitaker walked through those doors, alive, healthy, looking stronger than he had in months. And right beside him, holding his hand, was Isabella, wearing a blue dress, her hair braided, looking like the child she should have been allowed to be all along. The room exploded. Denise screamed, actually screamed, and fell back in her chair. Marcus went white as a sheet, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Other people in the room, witnesses and court staff who'd believed John was dead, gasped, some shouting, some standing up in shock. Judge Thompson banged her gavel. Order! Order in this court. But the chaos continued for a solid minute, everyone trying to process what they were seeing. John and Isabella walked to the front of the room and stood facing Marcus and Denise. John's voice was calm, steady, and cold as ice. Surprise, I'm not dead, and neither is my daughter. But you two already knew she wasn't dead, didn't you? Because you're the ones who kidnapped her. You're the ones who faked her death. And you're the ones who spent 2 months slowly poisoning me, trying to make my death look natural so you could steal everything I built. Denise tried to speak, her voice shaking. John, oh my God, you're alive. This is amazing. We all thought, but John cut her off. Stop, just stop. I know everything. Isabella heard you and Marcus in the farmhouse, heard you laughing about my grief, bragging about the poison, celebrating my suffering. She escaped and told me everything. Every single thing. Marcus stood up, trying to take control. This is insane. John, you're clearly not well. Maybe the grief has caused some kind of psychotic break. Isabella, sweetheart, we thought you died in that fire. If you've been somewhere, if someone took you, we need to find out who. Isabella stepped forward, her young voice cutting through his lies like a sword. It was you, Uncle Marcus. You and Denise. You locked me in a basement for 63 days. You kept me in the dark, barely fed me, let me think I was going to die there. I watched you through the floorboards. I heard every word you said. Timothy pulled out a laptop and set it on the conference table. Your Honor, I have audio recordings, video footage, and medical evidence. With the court's permission, I'd like to present it now. Judge Thompson nodded, her face grave. Timothy played the audio first. The conversation Isabella had overheard with Denise and Marcus discussing the poison, laughing about John's pain, planning how they'd split the inheritance. The voices were clear, unmistakable. Denise's voice talking about giving John special tea every morning. Marcus's voice discussing the forged documents. Both of them mocking John's grief, celebrating Isabella's kidnapping like it was a successful business deal. The room was silent except for the audio. When it finished, Timothy showed medical records. This is John Whitaker's blood work from the day his daughter returned. Ethylene glycol, commonly known as antifreeze, present in toxic levels. This is a substance that causes the exact symptoms John experienced: organ failure, nausea, neurological issues. And this, he held up an evidence bag, is the bottle of antifreeze found in Denise Crawford Whitaker's cosmetics bag, her fingerprints all over it. Then came the video. Security footage Timothy's team had captured of Marcus and Denise meeting at the hotel after the funeral, their conversation about how easy John had been to fool, their plans for spending his money, their complete lack of remorse. The footage was damning, undeniable. When it finished, Judge Thompson looked at Denise and Marcus with something beyond contempt. Is there anything you'd like to say before I call the bailiffs? Denise broke down completely. It wasn't my idea, it was Marcus. He planned everything. I just went along with it. I didn't want to hurt anyone. She was pointing at Marcus, throwing him under the bus to save herself. Marcus exploded. "You lying bitch. This was your plan. You came to me. You seduced me. You said we could have everything if we just got rid of the kid and then John." They turned on each other like rabid dogs, screaming, blaming, revealing even more details of their plot in their desperation to avoid responsibility. Judge Thompson banged her gavel so hard it cracked. "Bailiffs, arrest them both. Charges include attempted murder, kidnapping of a minor, fraud, and conspiracy." 4 bailiffs moved in, and Marcus actually tried to run. He made it to the door before they tackled him, cuffed him, and dragged him back. He was screaming, "This isn't over. I'll fight this. You can't prove anything." But everyone in that room knew he was done. They both were. Denise was cuffed more easily. She just collapsed, sobbing, her perfect makeup running down her face, all her charm and beauty stripped away to reveal the monster underneath. As they were led out, John called after them, "You took 2 months of my life. You tried to take everything. But love is stronger than greed. Isabella is stronger than your evil. And justice, real justice, always finds a way home." The courtroom erupted in applause. People John didn't even know were clapping, some crying, overcome by the sheer drama of it all. News crews outside got wind of what happened, and within an hour, it was national news. Millionaire and daughter stage elaborate sting to catch would-be murderers. The story went viral. John and Isabella became heroes, symbols of resilience and justice. But in that moment, in that courtroom, all John cared about was holding his daughter close and knowing that the nightmare was finally, truly over. 3 months after the trial, after Denise and Marcus had been sentenced to life in prison without parole, after the media frenzy had died down and life started resembling something like normal again, John and Isabella returned to that cemetery. It was early morning, the same time John used to visit when he thought his daughter was dead. The grass was wet with dew, the air crisp and clean. They walked hand in hand to the 2 graves, Isabella's and the empty one that had briefly held John's name before it was removed. John stood in front of Isabella's gravestone, the one that read, "Beloved daughter, taken too soon." He stared at it for a long moment, remembering all the mornings he'd knelt here, broken and destroyed, not knowing his daughter was alive and suffering. Isabella squeezed his hand. "It's okay, Daddy. We can leave it. It doesn't matter anymore." But John shook his head. "No, baby girl. This stone represents a lie that almost destroyed us. It needs to go." He'd brought tools, a sledgehammer and a crowbar. John positioned himself and swung. The first hit cracked the marble, the second hit split it, the third sent pieces flying. Isabella stepped back, watching her father demolish the symbol of her fake death with a fury that came from somewhere deep, somewhere that needed this physical act of destruction to heal. When the gravestone was nothing but rubble, John dropped the sledgehammer and pulled Isabella into his arms. "You're alive. You're here. And no one will ever make me doubt that again." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, crying tears that were finally tears of relief instead of grief. When they pulled apart, Isabella looked up at her father. "What happens now?" John smiled, a real smile, the first genuine one in months. "Now we live, really live. We don't just survive or get through days. We build a life again, together, the right way." The months that followed were about healing. John sold the mansion, too many bad memories attached to those walls. He and Isabella moved to a smaller house on the outskirts of Atlanta, a place with a big backyard where they planted a garden in Patricia's memory. John cut back on work, spending more time just being a father. They went to therapy, both individual and together, working through the trauma of what they'd experienced. Isabella had nightmares for a while, dreams of being back in that basement, but John was always there, always ready to remind her she was safe. John also made changes to his business. He brought in new partners, people he'd vetted extensively, people with integrity. He set up a foundation in Isabella's name, the Isabella Whitaker Survivor Foundation, dedicated to helping children who'd been victims of kidnapping and family violence. The foundation provided counseling, legal assistance, and safe housing. It became Isabella's passion project as she got older, a way to turn her pain into purpose. The community rallied around them in beautiful ways. The church held a celebration of life service, this time celebrating that both John and Isabella were alive and together. Mrs. Chen continued working for them, becoming less of a housekeeper and more like family. She'd been the one person outside Timothy who'd kept their secret, who'd helped pull off the sting, and her loyalty meant everything. John gave her a generous bonus and a partnership stake in one of his real estate holdings. She cried and tried to refuse, but John insisted. "You protected my daughter when I couldn't. That's worth more than money." But perhaps the most important healing came from forgiveness. Not forgiveness for Denise and Marcus. They'd made their choices and would live with the consequences. But forgiveness for himself. John had spent months blaming himself for not seeing the signs, for trusting the wrong people, for not protecting Isabella. The guilt ate at him. But Isabella, wise beyond her 12 years, sat him down one evening and said something that changed his perspective. "Daddy, you taught me that love means trusting people, believing in the good in them, giving them chances. You didn't do anything wrong by loving Denise or trusting Uncle Marcus. They did wrong by betraying that love. If you stop trusting everyone because of what they did, they win, they take away who you are. Don't let them do that." John looked at his daughter, this incredible child who'd survived the unthinkable and came out the other side with her heart still intact, and he realized she was right. Evil exists in the world, but so does good. And you can't let the existence of one make you blind to the other. A year after the trial, John started dating again, slowly and carefully. He met a woman named Angela at Isabella's school, a teacher who was kind and genuine and patient with his hesitation to trust. Isabella liked her, and that mattered more than anything. "She's nice, Daddy," Isabella said after their first meeting. "She smiles with her eyes, not just her mouth. That's how you know it's real." John laughed and hugged his daughter. "When did you get so wise?" Isabella grinned. "I learned from the best." The lessons from this story are ones that John and Isabella lived every day. They learned that betrayal often comes from the people closest to you, not because all people are bad, but because those are the people who have access to your heart. They learned that trust is valuable precisely because it can be broken, and giving it anyway is an act of courage. They learned that money can bring out the worst in people, showing you who they really are when something valuable is on the line. But most importantly, they learned that love is the strongest force in existence. Love made John fight for his daughter even when the world said she was dead. Love made Isabella escape that basement and run through the night to save her father. Love survived betrayal, poison, and evil, and came out stronger on the other side. There's a photo that hangs in their living room now, taken on Isabella's 13th birthday, her first birthday after everything happened. She's blowing out candles, John's arm around her shoulders, both of them grinning like they've just won the lottery, because in a way, they had. They'd won life. They'd won each other. They'd won the chance to start over. And sometimes, that's the biggest jackpot of all. Some stories don't end in darkness. Some begin the moment you choose to fight your way back into the light. John and Isabella's story could have ended in that cemetery with a father mourning a daughter who wasn't dead and a daughter watching from behind a tree, too afraid to reveal herself. But they didn't let it end there. They fought. They planned. They risked everything for a chance at justice. And they won. Not just against Denise and Marcus, but against the despair that tried to swallow them whole. Today, Isabella is 16 years old, a straight-A student who wants to become a lawyer, specifically a prosecutor who fights for victims of family crimes. She volunteers at the foundation that bears her name, talking to other survivors, letting them know they're not alone. John is healthy, thriving, and remarried to Angela, who Isabella calls her bonus mom. They have Sunday dinners every week, just the three of them, and they say grace before every meal, thanking God for second chances, for survival, for the miracle of being together. The graves in that cemetery are gone, replaced with a memorial bench that reads, "In celebration of life, love, and the strength to fight back." People sit there sometimes, reading the plaque, wondering about the story behind it. And if they really knew what that bench represented, they'd understand that some battles are won not with weapons or money, but with the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. Now, I want to ask you something. Put yourself in Isabella's shoes for a moment. You're 12 years old, locked in a basement, barely surviving, and you overhear the people who kidnapped you planning to murder your father. What would you have done? Would you have had the courage to escape? Would you have risked running through the woods at night, bleeding and terrified, not knowing if you'd make it? Or would fear have kept you frozen in that basement, hoping someone else would save you? Think about it. Really think about it. Because Isabella did something most adults couldn't do. She saved herself and her father through pure determination and love. And what about John? Imagine discovering that your wife and your brother, the two people you trusted most in the world, had kidnapped your daughter, faked her death, and spent months poisoning you to steal your money. How would you respond? Would you have had the clarity to plan that sting operation, to fake your own death and expose them publicly? Or would rage have driven you to do something that would have landed you in jail? John chose justice over vengeance. He chose to do it the right way, even though every fiber of his being wanted immediate revenge. That takes strength most people don't have. Here's another question for you. Do you think justice always comes back around? Do you believe that people like Denise and Marcus eventually face consequences for their actions? Or do you think sometimes evil wins? I'm curious what you believe, because this story shows that sometimes, with enough courage and enough love, the good guys actually do win. But it required action. It required Isabella escaping, John planning, Timothy helping. Justice didn't just fall from the sky. They had to fight for it, risk for it, sacrifice for it. So drop in the comments, do you think justice is something that happens or something you have to make happen? And here's the big one. Have you ever trusted someone who wasn't what they seemed? Have you ever had that moment where someone you loved, someone you thought you knew, revealed themselves to be completely different? Maybe it wasn't as extreme as trying to murder you, but betrayal comes in many forms. A friend who talked behind your back, a partner who cheated, a family member who stole from you. That pain of discovering someone isn't who you thought they were, it cuts deep. If you've experienced that, I want you to know you're not alone. John and Isabella experienced it and survived. So can you. But here's what I really want you to take from this story. Love is worth the risk. Trust is worth giving, even though it can be broken. Because the alternative is living in fear, suspecting everyone, never letting anyone close. That's not living, that's existing. John could have closed himself off after Patricia died, never remarried, never let anyone into his heart again. But he didn't. He took a chance on Denise, and yes, it went horribly wrong. But that experience didn't destroy his capacity to love. He healed, learned, and eventually opened his heart to Angela. He didn't let Denise's betrayal turn him into something he wasn't. And Isabella could have let those 63 days in captivity define her forever. She could have become bitter, angry, closed off. But she didn't. She turned her pain into purpose, her trauma into a foundation that helps others. She chose to believe in goodness even after experiencing evil. That's not naivety. That's strength. That's wisdom. That's the choice we all have to make when life tries to break us. So, before you go, I want you to do something. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own struggles or your own strength, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what part of the story hit you hardest. Tell me about your own experiences with betrayal or survival or fighting back. This community we're building here, it's about more than just watching videos. It's about connecting, sharing, and reminding each other that we're not alone in this complicated, beautiful, painful, amazing thing called life. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We share stories like this every week. Real stories, American stories, tales about regular people who faced extraordinary circumstances and found the strength to overcome. These aren't fairy tales. These are the stories of everyday heroes, people like John and Isabella, people maybe like you, who refuse to let darkness have the final word. Click that bell so you're notified every time we post, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe you know somebody who's going through their own battle right now, fighting their own demons, facing their own betrayal. Send them this story. Let them know that survival is possible. Let them know that justice can win. Let them know that love is stronger than evil. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do for each other is share stories that remind us why we keep fighting. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for caring about John and Isabella, for getting angry at Denise and Marcus, for feeling the emotions this story deserves. That's what makes this community special. You're not just passive viewers. You're engaged, caring people who believe in justice, in love, in second chances. Keep being that. Keep believing that. Keep fighting for it in your own lives. Remember, some stories don't end in darkness. Some begin the moment you choose to fight your way back into the light. John and Isabella fought their way back. So can you. So can all of us. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and never forget that you're stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and loved more than you know. God bless.